I mean, I'm not, well, yeah, it's not popping up in mine, but it's, at least you can see it. So we're good to go, right?
Yeah.
We are.
Good.
Let's go ahead and get started then. We appreciate you being here. And everybody, thank you for joining us today. This is the third part of a series with Dave Larsen on reversing cognitive decline. I'm Scott Larsen. I'm the marketing manager for Psych Online. And if you're not familiar with Psych Online is an online platform that provides all the tools and services for mental health care providers to treat patients either in the office or remotely. Dave Larsen, who's joining us, is the education chairman for the American Brain Council, whose mission it is to educate health professionals and the public on what can be done to avoid memory loss, Alzheimer's, and dementia. Mr. Larsen holds a double master's in family and human development and psychology. He's a former master trainer for the American Alzheimer's Association, or for the Alzheimer's Association, was a lead site investigator in one of the most significant Alzheimer's research studies ever conducted. He's authored over 120 newspaper and magazine articles, as well as 5 books on memory, health, and nutrition. He is currently the director of Advanced Memory Dynamics, an independent research, education, and consulting company, as well as being the education chairman for the American Brain Council. So Dave, thank you so much for joining us today for this part 3 of the series. If you can maybe give us a little bit of a refresher kind of to start, to maybe recap what we've learned before, because there may be some here that are new. That would be helpful.
Do you want to ask that if there are any that are new? Or should we just assume there are some new people?
Maybe it's been a while, so maybe just a little bit of a refresher anyway would be helpful.
Okay, I can do that. That's fine, sure. So in the first session, hopefully you can see that, we talked about one of the benefits of this program or approach that I'm going to share with you is that not only does it reduce the risk for dementia, but it also has been shown the same processes, procedures to reduce the risk for diabetes and depression and strokes, heart attacks, and even some forms of cancer. We talked about dementia, that's not a disease per se, but it's a loss of 2 or more cognitive abilities, and there's a variety of things that can contribute to cognitive decline or dementia. We talked about some of the typical diseases like Alzheimer's as a cause of dementia, frontotemporal dementia, Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome from alcohol abuse is another, etc. And we noted that heretofore, at least earlier in this decade, the notion was that there was nothing that can be done to prevent or mitigate Alzheimer's. So in the first session, we talked about, while even though traditional medicine really doesn't have any good approaches for arresting or preventing or reversing cognitive decline or specifically Alzheimer's, others in the world have been quite successful in coming up with approaches that were able to do that. We talked a little bit about the various causes. One of the problems with cognitive decline is that we now know over 100 different things that can contribute to that. This one slide, if you're seeing what I'm trying to show you, talks about some of the causes. We're going to go over some of those later on, so we're not going to spend any more time on that. But I mentioned the Finnish geriatric study where they used a combined approach with over 1,200 senior Finns, and they were able to affect significant reversal of symptoms, and the people on the protocol applying what we know in terms of diet and lifestyle did significantly better in reducing their risk for cognitive decline. And noting even that this study showed that in fact Alzheimer's can be prevented. All of those individuals had mild cognitive impairment, but many were able to reverse that with a healthy diet, exercise, cognitive activities, social activities were the primary things. And then we reviewed some other research, just talking about the importance of reinforcing the importance of diet and lifestyle and its efficacy for brain health and cognitive decline in particular. And we talked about how they all work together. This is a very important concept, kind of critical. We've learned that nutritional deficiencies are among the primary causes. I mean, we know that people who were older are more prone to cognitive decline, and that's in large measure due to nutritional deficiencies that develop as we get older. Seniors don't eat as well, they don't digest or assimilate nutrients as well, they don't create nutrients in their body that the brain needs as well. But also they tend to have poor circulation, so even though they might eat very well and take appropriate supplements or whatever, if they don't have a good circulatory system, if those nutrients and oxygen are not well circulated to the brain, then there's going to be some problems. And then there needs to be some demand on the brain, a reason for the brain to soak up those nutrients. So learning new things provides that. And then social activities provides reinforcement for learning. And we reviewed a major study out of Germany that again noted that lifestyle has a major impact on the variables or the conditions that affect cognition, and can reduce also the risk for, I'm in the same approach, can also reduce the risk for cancer. But then we talked about, okay, so we know that dementia can be prevented in most cases, actually, if people are doing the right things. But then we talked about what about reversing cognitive decline? What about those people that are well into or maybe past mild cognitive impairment? Can anything be done for them? And we reviewed the research of Dr. Bredesen, wherein he reversed 9 out of 10 cases of significant Alzheimer's. 9 out of 10 of these people had the Alzheimer's APOE4 gene, and all of them had significant impairments. And he was able to reverse that in a landmark study with 9 out of 10 of those. He's since done that with certainly hundreds, if not thousands, of people. He's trained over 800 practitioners now throughout the United States. On the next slide, noticed not only him, but other healthcare professionals that have followed this same approach. This noted Dr. Fotua used to be the director of science for the Alzheimer's Association when I worked for them. And he's achieved similar remissions and reversals, and others have around the country and now around the world. Hundreds of people, probably thousands at this point in time, have been reversed. And for the past 2.5 years, my partner, an MD, and I have been working with individuals using this protocol. We went through Dr. Bredesen's advanced clinical training for reversing cognitive decline. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about here in this segment today, is what is involved in that protocol, or at least the basics of that. I mean, obviously we don't have a lot of time. I mean, that's about a 30, 40-hour course that we went through. So, this is going to be kind of a quick and easy, but I want to share with you the highlights of that protocol. We did talk about these 7 pillars of brain health. That's kind of the underlying core for most of these programs. And I'm going to touch on those points again if you missed that. But you should hopefully be seeing a slide now that says an effective treatment plan includes. Are we seeing that?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Okay. So, and those of you who are psychologists or work in the sciences, I mean, all of this is pretty basic science for reversing any type of disorder. But we, of course, start out with some basic measurements, cognitive measurements. We typically use a MoCA Montreal cognitive assessment to give us a rough idea as to where they are at in terms of dementia. And then there are other more specific tests that we use that have been developed, largely computer-based tests. But there's a bunch of those out there. Let's see. To measure various cognitive abilities, get an idea as to where they're at. And then we also want to measure some biomarkers. but generally before the biomarkers, we do a really in-depth assessment of potential contributing factors. Dr. Bredesen and others have identified over 100 of these potential contributing factors. That's why he and others have noted that we will probably never, I mean almost assuredly, we will never have one pill that people can take that will prevent or certainly reverse Alzheimer's, because there are just so many different things that can cause it. And I'll review 15 of those primary contributors in a little bit, but there are lots of different potential. Pardon me? I'm sorry, there was a question. Can you repeat the question?
I don't think it was a question. I think it was someone talking.
Hello? Okay. Anyway, if there's a if there was a question there, if you want to ask it again, otherwise I'll just keep going through here. And I'm going to be leaving time at the end. In fact, in a little bit, I'll leave some time after each of these slides because, that review didn't take very long. So after each of these, I'll leave some time and we can you can ask questions about them if you'd like to. I think you can do that either by typing them in, apparently, or unmuting and asking the question. But the real key to being effective in this approach, especially for people, say, who have Alzheimer's and they have some significant decline that are noticeable to others, then and or in all cases, even if it's just minor issues, we want to know what has contributed to this. Have they had diabetes? We know that blood sugar issues can be significant contributing factors. Blood pressure. Have they had head injuries, traumatic TBIs, traumatic brain injuries? What is contributing to this? So there's an extensive survey questionnaire that we give to all of the people that we do intakes on, and we have them fill out to identify what of those issues are true for them in terms of diet and exercise and lifestyle and pollutants in the air and potentially in their food or other environmental factors, etc. And then once, and that's usually my job, I collect that and I review that, and then I summarize those for the doctor that I'm working with, and that gives him a better idea as to what.
Yeah, okay. I think it's working.
Want to give him a better idea as to what biomarkers to look for. So what in the blood, what nutrients might be lacking, other biomarkers, particularly we look at inflammatory biomarkers like C-reactive protein. Homocysteine is a biomarker for inflammation in the brain. Those are quite helpful for us. And then looking at different nutrient levels, omega-3 levels, the vascular system, cholesterol, etc. To get a better idea as to what's happening biologically, physiologically in the body that might be contributing to this. And again, we're going to touch on those in a bit. And then we develop a plan to target those underlying factors. If they have high blood pressure, we want to address that. If they have high blood sugar, it's essential that that be addressed. People are not going to make progress if we don't address that. If they're not sleeping well, that's one of the things that we notice, that particularly if they're sleeping a lot during the day or napping extensively during the day. Some interesting research I was reviewing just last week, a reminder, noted that people that are napping either more frequently or for longer durations during the day, that actually can trigger some things that cause decline in the brain. But that's usually associated with not sleeping well at night. So we've learned that that's one of the first things that we have to do, is to make sure we get that piece of the puzzle correct. Even some people on sleep apnea machines might be having too many events during the night, that they're still having too many gaps where they're not getting the oxygen they need. And until that's fixed, we can give them all sorts of other things, and they can do all sorts of other things. But until that's addressed, they're not going to make progress, likely. So we identify the contributing factors, and then we address those, well, kind of one by one, but we all do it in a combined synergistic approach simultaneously, really, pretty much so. Some others are, well, we're going to look at those in the future here in a couple of slides. I was just thinking thyroid issues are another major one. So then we work with them to adjust their diet, as I noted in the beginning. Most cognitive decline is related to nutritional deficiencies, biological or biochemical deficiencies, usually more specifically dietary or nutritional deficiencies in the body. So we talk about what constitutes a brain healthy diet and lifestyle, physical activity, mental activities, and encourage them to increase their physical activity as well as their mental activities, and give them some specific suggestions along those lines. Supplements are a major part of this for all of those who are making significant progress in reversing cognitive decline. Now, prevention doesn't always require supplementing, but once they've had significant decline issues, then it's almost always going to require some supplementation to reverse that. There really are very few meds that make much of a difference with this, and actually many more meds that can cause problems rather than address these effectively. Nutrition seems to be much more effective, and I might mention Dr. Bredesen. I mean, he's not a naturopath or a chiropractor. I mean, he's a neurologist, MD, professor of neurology at UCLA for more than 20 years. So he is well schooled in traditional medicine, but he found that we've been overlooking nutrition and some other lifestyle factors that are really important when it comes to the brain. And of course, as I noted, we want to make sure that they're getting a good night's sleep. And by the way, the supplements are specific to what their conditions are. And there's actually, contrary to what some people think there isn't much empirical evidence for the value of supplements. But while that might have been true 30 years ago, that's not so true today. I mean, there's still a lot of nutrients out there that haven't been well studied, but many have been studied. Some, like fish oil, there are over 3,000 studies on the efficacy of omega-3 fatty acids or fish oils for the vascular system and for the brain. So there's been a lot of research since the early 70s, particularly in terms of nutrition and how it can be of therapeutic value. I'll give you some examples of those in a little bit. Then, of course, we want to continue measuring their progress. That's how we know if these interventions are helpful or not, by measuring, are they getting better? Are there biomarkers? So we do cognitive assessments again, and there's a program, there's a company called Cognifit that I particularly like their assessment. It measures their abilities in 23 functional areas with the brain, and so that's pretty sensitive to modifications. But then we also want to do blood tests again to check their biomarkers to see if their homocysteine is going down, for example, or C-reactive protein. How's their A1C? If they're borderline diabetic, is that getting well within safe or healthy levels, etc. So That helps us to know if we're on course, if we're making progress objectively or not. And if not, then we need to tweak the plan and make some adjustments so we are. Okay, let's see, what are we at? I think we're still doing pretty well. So I noted that there are over 100 different things that can contribute to cognitive decline. I've noted 15 of the most common ones. I guess we might say key, but there are other important ones as well other than these. But we know age is the primary contributor to Alzheimer's and other, quote, age-related cognitive decline. Genetics, of course, is very important. And so we look at the genetics. We look to see what type of APOE they have. There's APOE 1, 2, 3, and 4. If they have APOE 4, and there are 2 alleles there, or genetic variants, if you're not familiar with that term. And so most people have like APOE 2 and APOE 3. But if one of those is a 4, then that means that they have higher than normal risk for Alzheimer's. APOE 4 has been well researched as increasing the risk for Alzheimer's in a variety of ways. If they can potentially have 2 APOE 4, and that's basically a double whammy, and I have one of our clients has that condition. But we want to look at least those genetics to see if they have that Alzheimer's gene, because we know quite a bit about what that means for the body, what deficiencies that creates in the body. One of them is the ability to quench free radicals or oxidants in the body. So they'll probably need more antioxidants to offset that or protect their brain against oxidative stress. Blood pressure, I mentioned that. Probably at least 90% of people who have cognitive decline, and I remember one study that suggested 97% of people who have cognitive decline have problems with circulation, blood flow. I remember talking with a professor from England a number of years ago. My son was doing some postgraduate work over there, and I got the opportunity to talk with one of their researchers at the university where he was going to, and he said most of their focus was on vascular issues, because as we noted, if people aren't getting those nutrients and oxygen circulated well to the brain, they're going to have some problems, and usually those translate into high blood pressure. So if there's occlusions in the arteries, if there's too much plaque buildup, etc., or the vasculature is just getting dilapidated and not working well, that's their arteries are getting harder, calcium buildup in there, or any type of heart problem. If they have AFib, for example, their heart's just not beating fully, that can be a contributor to cognitive decline. As well as almost anything that affects the heart or vascular system can end up affecting cognition. So we want to look at those carefully. I mentioned diabetes. It turns out that, the brain needs glucose. It's one of the primary, if not the primary source of energy for the brain. But too high a blood sugar over time creates a condition called insulin resistance. The cells know if they block insulin, insulin's job is to carry glucose into the cells. So the body knows the brain knows if it blocks insulin, then glucose is not going to flood it. And too much glucose, we know, in the blood can damage other proteins that lead to Alzheimer's. And particularly that's a problem with people who are APOE4, and even though they don't have Alzheimer's in their body, they can have, diabetes in their body, they can have blood sugar issues in their brain, which can damage brain cells. So we want to look carefully at A1C. Dr. Bredesen suggests A1C. I mean, typically I hear these advertisements on television. The woman says, "Hey, my A1C is 7.0. I mean, aren't I delighted?" Well, Bredesen would say, "Well, yeah, but that means you're vulnerable to Alzheimer's. We want to have that A1C down around 5.4. So anything 5.9 and above is prediabetes, and it's causing damage. You can bet that if somebody, if you have A1C of 5.9, there's a high risk of that causing damage to blood vessels and to cells in the brain. Thyroid is a major contributor to metabolism. The real so there's several really important things we have to keep track of. I mentioned inflammation in the brain is really important, and another thing is energy production. The brain is a nutrient hog, and but it's also an energy hog. It uses more energy than any other organ other than the heart. And so it's really important that the metabolism is working well. The mitochondria in the cells are working well to produce energy for thinking, for talking, for recalling memories, etc. So anyway, so we look closely at the thyroid. Prolonged stress. There's interesting research out of, I think this was UCLA actually, that noted that prolonged stress increases cortisol in the brain. And cortisol, there's a lot of cortisol in the hippocampus where memories are created. And unfortunately, cortisol can damage those cells. Prolonged exposure to cortisol can damage those cells in the hippocampus, leading to Alzheimer's and other disorders. Memory problems are one of the earliest signs of Alzheimer's. Of course, not everybody with memory problems develops Alzheimer's, but we do know that people that have depression, for example, prolonged stress or depression lasting 2 or more years, especially if it's untreated, are going to have higher risk for cognitive decline as they get older. And even if it is treated, unfortunately, a lot of the medications contribute to cognitive decline in other ways, inadvertently. Head injuries obviously can cause problems. I think everybody knows that even one concussion, but especially 2 or more concussions, dramatically increase risk for cognitive issues. And again, that's through inflammation. That creates inflammation in the brain that can go on for decades. Even people that had head injuries in high school football or other activities. I've had a couple of clients that fell out of vehicles on their head, and one of my clients who is Mr. America, bodybuilder, Mr. Universe, he was Arnold Schwarzenegger's mentor, who ended up dying with Alzheimer's. And in discussing that with him, he noted that when he was about 12, he fell out of a pickup truck on his head at his father's farm and was in the hospital for a while with the world spinning around. And it's quite possible, the research suggests, that the damage from that and the inflammation that caused, if that was never fully addressed in the brain, can give you problems in your later years of life. So it's very important to address that inflammation. Of course, sleep is critically important, and physical activity we talked about, and mental activity. And we want to look at their medications, as I'll show you some in a bit. I think I mentioned there are over 200 that can increase risk for cognitive decline in various ways. People who have a history of smoking are at greater risk. Kind of pollution, it pollutes their air, but causes some other problems as they suck that air into their body, and tars, etc. People who abuse alcohol. Some interesting research in Italy and other places where people are use to that suggests that some wine, for example, might actually be healthy for the brain in the early stages. But once people start to develop dementia, almost any alcohol can make things worse. And of course, people who binge drink and people who are routinely get drunk, alcohol depletes vitamin B1, thiamine, in the brain, and a lot of people have a genetic vulnerability to that. And that lack of vitamin B1 then results in damage to important parts of the brain, and leads to dementia via alcohol, or Korsakoff syndrome. Hearing status is also important. If people don't hear things well, I worked a couple of years with the hearing industry and spoke at the International Hearing Society conference in Chicago a few years ago about this connection. Yeah, if people aren't either hearing or seeing, if they don't get that stimulus to their brain, that's believed to be an issue. And then the hearing apparatus is also vulnerable to oxidative stress. And oftentimes getting hearing aids early on in the game can reduce, some interesting research showing might reduce that stress for cognitive decline. So I said I was going to give you a chance to ask questions, and I have not done that for the last couple of slides. So anybody have any questions at this point in time? We're still running a little bit ahead, either of the previous slides or this one. Give you just a minute to think about those. Let's see. So effective treatment plan. And then factors contributing to cognitive decline. Scott, do you see any questions? Anybody else have any questions? If not, we will move on. If you bring up a question, just go ahead and ask, and I'll stop and we'll go over it. So in this next section, I want to share with you, because most of you probably work with, I doubt many of you prescribe meds. If we have so many psychiatrists on the call, I know we had some the last time I did this, so some of you might be able to dispense meds, but all of you probably work with individuals that are taking medications. And if they're having some memory issues, etc., I want to make you aware of some of the medications, types of medications. We're not talking about individual ones. If you have questions about areas, I do have my cheat sheet here. I can tell you the specific medications in that class that have been found to be detrimental, but a lot of these, most of them in that class, can have a detrimental impact, like antacids, proton pump inhibitors, for example, like Pridosec and Tagamet and others, inhibit acids in the stomach that are critical for breaking down proteins and extracting vitamin B12, for example, as well as magnesium. And so we know that vitamin B12 is critical for energy production in the brain. If any of you have worked at senior centers, you know that they monitor B12 quite closely with seniors because of that reason. And so a lot of people we've found that have memory issues have been on antacids for much of their life. Now, my point with these next two slides is that Bredesen and lots of other researchers before him have come up with a wide variety of things that can address most of what most medications address. They might not be as quick or initially as powerful as the medication, but usually, and some of them are actually quicker and more powerful. I'll share that with you when we talk about depression. Some that are actually both quicker and more potent than psychotropic medication. But anyways, I'll just go through some of these then. People that have acid reflux or GERD typically end up taking these antacids, but we know that they often are lacking enzymes needed to break down their foods. I had a pharmacist explain this to me. He was actually a professor at a local university, and he ran a pharmacy. And he said he recommends to his the people that come in who want antacids or have been prescribed that they take broad spectrum enzymes to digest their proteins and fats and fibers and other things. Betaine, hydrochloric, and many of them lack hydrochloric acid, and that seems quite helpful. Anesthesias, I put this in somewhat alphabetical order, but people that have operations, especially for extended periods of time, oftentimes end up with cognitive issues that generally go away, but if they're older, oftentimes they do not go away. So we've had several clients who that appears to have been their primary cause. One was a nurse who broke her wrist, and it basically shattered her wrist, and the operation lasted about 2 hours. And after that, her memory was just not the same for several years before she came in contact with my partner, and we worked with her, and it took about 9 months before her memory was better. She still struggles with that somewhat, but at least she's functioning much better than she was. But some medications, some anesthesias are better than others. So if you or you know someone who's going in for an operation, they need to talk with, and if they have some cognitive impairment, then they are more vulnerable. People in early stages of Alzheimer's tend to react much worse to anesthesias than others. So they need to talk with the anesthesiologist, let them know that they have some cognitive vulnerabilities there, and some anesthesias are safer than others for the brain. Antibiotics, we're not against antibiotics, but long-term use of those can mess with the microbiome in the body. There's a lot of research going on with that. One research showed that, and of course probiotics help with that in Europe showed that people who took a probiotic for an extended period of time, this was a study with Alzheimer's patients, like 6 months on probiotics, and improved their cognition scores for these Alzheimer's patients, not all of them, but a significant number of them. So there's an interesting connection between our gut and our brain. And antibiotics, if they're not followed by some probiotics, it can deplete the gut bacteria and can cause a host of problems. There are a variety of things that are somewhat natural. I just mentioned one. Ginger is a natural antibiotic. There's a bunch of them, different essential oils and other things. Anticonvulsants, one of my early clients that I worked with had a seizure disorder, and I worked with him several months before I found out that the medication that he was on, when I looked it up on drugs.com, one of the side effects was memory problems. And that appears to be true with a variety of anticonvulsants, that they can contribute to memory issues. Gabapentin is often given for people who have seizure disorders, but the GABA, or something called GABA, it comes from a plant source, I believe, as does kava, but they enhance GABA, and they don't have some of the side effects that can happen with gabapentin. Gabapentin can contribute to memory problems down the road or over an extended period of time, if taken for an extended period of time. Theanine is another protein. It's in green tea, for example, and that helps calm down the brain somewhat. Is there a question out there? Okay, guess not. There are a variety of medications that are anticholinergic medications. Choline is an essential building block for memories. The neurotransmitter for memories, as you probably know, is acetylcholine. And these anticholinergic medications block acetylcholine production. And so, I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer if you think about it. If you block the primary nutrient needed to create memories, or the neurotransmitter for memories, then you might have memory problems, and that indeed is the case. And so for example, medications for incontinence, some of them are anticholinergic medications. And there are a variety of things, natural things that seem to help with incontinence. Pumpkin seed extract is one for women. I was going to look up, there are others, some others for men. I was going to find that one, but I didn't. But if you're a man or you have a father that has a problem with that, if you want to email me, I'll send you a link to a natural formulation that I know has a couple of things in that were shown to reduce the risk for having to get up in the middle of the night and go to the bathroom. That's a problem for a lot of our clients, and of course that disrupts sleep. So there are several things that can be quite helpful that way. There's a bladder control formulation. Let's talk a minute about antidepressants. Unfortunately, a lot of particularly the older antidepressants, we knew could cause problems for memory, etc. But and I always thought SSRIs were okay, like Prozac, etc. But some of the newer research, but I had a client that was on Prozac and his wife just kept giving him more of it, didn't let us know, but bumped it up, and he just kept getting worse. And she would say, why is he getting worse? But then I finally went back and said, now let's review his meds again. And she said, oh, well, I did double his Prozac because he seemed kind of anxious at times. Then I was saying, well, Prozac wasn't too bad. And the doctor it wasn't a big red flag to him because we thought he was only taking 10 milligrams, but now he was up to 40. But when I looked at the research on that, and Prozac, unfortunately, in recent research, both in the U.S. and Taiwan, was shown to be a significant contributor to cognitive decline, including Alzheimer's. It just kind of numbs the brain. A lot of these antidepressants and benzodiazepines we'll talk about, sedatives, they are sedatives for the brain, and they inhibit the brain's production of the chemistry needed to think and remember well. Yes, but talking about natural alternatives, most antidepressants, they say give it a week or so to really get in your system and take effect. Well, there's something that the brain makes from several B vitamins, B12, B6, B9. It's called acetylcholine, abbreviated SAMe. Two major studies at Harvard showed that SAMe was more effective than the antidepressant that they were using. I think it was imipramine. I'm not, but I'm not sure about which one it was. But they noted that these were for treatment-resistant individuals, that if they added SAMe to the mix, people got better twice as fast. And SAMe works. Either if the first dose doesn't work within an hour, we don't suggest taking more than one the first time they take it, and generally with food, so a person doesn't have an adverse reaction to it. But by the second or third day, if SAMe is taken independent of other proteins, with say some juice or maybe even water, within a half an hour, people are going to feel a difference. Same with L-tryptophan. L-tryptophan with an ounce of grape juice, 500 milligrams of L-tryptophan with an ounce of grape juice is going to calm a person down almost invariably, because it's the primary protein that increases serotonin in the body. And so it's great to help people get a good night's sleep, but it also calms them down during the day, and lots of other things, lots of other natural things that increase serotonin. Valerian root, what's called St. John's wort, hypericum, I think it's called. Anyway, a variety of things there. Let's see. Antihistamines. Histamines are important for the brain as well, for a variety of functions, and so we block those, and that can cause some issues. I have one client that found that intranasal, there's a glutathione swish. Glutathione is the most powerful antioxidant that our body produces, but some innovative people figured out, well, and taking it orally, usually it's wiped out on the stomach, but they came up with a swish that you swish it around and it's absorbed through the oral cavities in the mouth. But this woman found that if she kind of snorted it up her nose, there's a Diddy pot, I can't always remember what that is called. That it's used for breathing things, but somehow she would squirt it into her nose or inhale that, and she found when she did that cleared up her intranasal issues. Glutathione. Antipsychotic meds, there are not a lot of natural things. I mean, of course, that's really difficult to address those. There's some research by a Dr. Hoffer in Canada that found high levels of niacin. There's now high levels of niacin, if you're aware, can cause a flushing effect in the body, but he found that high levels of that can be helpful for people who are schizophrenic, for example, significantly reduce their symptoms for many. Another protein called taurine that has been shown to have some effect that way, as well as theanine. I see that I'm taking too much time, so I'm sorry. I'll try to go through this really quickly because I'm running behind here. You'll see benzodiazepines have definitely been shown to increase risk for Alzheimer's. If you have somebody on benzodiazepines, they got to get off, or almost 80% chance they're going to develop significant memory problems down the road. And there's some natural things that are helpful for that. Interesting skull cap, I hadn't heard much about. I'm not really big into herbs, but interesting research on skull caps, good for to help calm down the nervous system, etc. Theanine increases GABA, we've talked about. For blood pressure, there's a variety of things that naturally, they're vasodilators. Hawthornberry is one of them. Beetroot is another reason why you see a lot of athletes using beetroot these days. That's because it improves blood flow in their body. Estrogen, typical estrogen medication has not been very helpful. It can cause problems. On the other hand, bioidentical estradiol is very, very important. Some interesting research at Columbia University that showed estrogen is just critical for brain health and memory in senior women. And bioidentical hormones, often if started early enough, can make a dramatic difference in cognition. Pain relievers, and there are a variety of things, natural things in the pain world. Let's see, white willow bark, I believe, is what aspirin is made from. There's something called curcumin from turmeric, the herb out of India, that is quite helpful in reducing inflammation. And there's a product called Curamin that has some DL-phenylalanine that tends to block pain receptors. CBD oil is being used widely now for that. There's some natural sedatives. I like valerian. Ashwagandha is helpful. We talked about sleep aids. Almost any statin medicine, unfortunately, contributes or blocks the brain's production of CoQ10 needed by the hippocampus to create energy, as well as steroids can create that cortisol in the brain that can be harmful for the brain. Excuse me. And chemotherapy increases oxidative stress. I need to get a little bit of water. If you can think of a question, I'll be right back. But I know I got to get something for my voice. Just a second, excuse me.
We do have a couple of questions that I see, so we'll make sure that we get to those in the end. In the meantime, if you have additional questions that you can think of, please feel free to put them in the messaging area. You can get there by clicking on just the messaging icon if you don't see messaging already.
Okay, I'm back now. So the contention of many people who are, we call functional medicine doctors, people who are doctors that have really gotten into nutrition, and there's a Dr. Perlmutter in Florida, and a Dr. Hyman, who's was at the Cleveland Clinic for a period of time, Dr. Bredesen and Botuin and others, contend that there are natural, more natural things that can take the place of almost any medication. And in the process of doing that, not only do they address the problems like anxiety, but they also protect the brain and maybe help to enhance cognitive functioning. Any questions along that line? Could you share what sheets with details, meds, etc.? Well, if you'd like a copy, I have a book. There's several books that I've written for people who attended my classes when I was teaching primarily around the country for a continuing education credit. There's a book that I can send to you. I was asking $10, but if the coronavirus has left you poor, you can't afford $10, just email me. I'll give you my email at the end, david@abcbrain.org. If you just email me, I'll send you that book, and it has a chapter that has all of those in there. That would probably be the best thing. So I'll send it to you free. I mean, if you can give me a $10 contribution to the cause, that would be great. But that's probably going to be the best way to obtain that. I don't have them just in a single document right now. What dosage of Sammy is recommended? Generally, 200 milligrams is where we start out, and then we just up it. The brain, a healthy brain, produces about 1.5 grams or 2 grams of Sammy. A healthy brain produces 2 grams of Sammy or more per day. So I think in the Harvard studies, they were giving them typically 800 milligrams of that a day for depression. Any other questions? Let me go on. There's just a couple of other slides, and then we'll be done here, and we'll be about out of time. 12 recommendations for improving cognition. Okay, so these are then some of the typical things that are recommended in Bredesen's program or most other programs that are designed to either prevent or arrest or reverse cognitive decline. Eating less sugar. It's kind of gotten out of control in our diet. A lot of research showing that people in third world countries are cognitively and in terms of heart disease and other things much healthier than people who consume the standard American diet. And when we introduce our standard American diet to them, they start getting sicker. They get diabetes, they develop dementia, etc. But we just eat too much sugar, and even sugar substitutes. High fructose corn syrup isn't particularly good. Aspartame is not good for a lot of people. Some have more problems with that than others. And we don't eat enough vegetables. We don't eat enough fresh vegetables. Probably don't eat enough healthy fish. So those things are really important in terms of diet. We look closely at diet, try to get more healthy fats in there. That's very important. The ketogenic diet has been found to be quite helpful for people with cognitive issues. Fasting, intermittent fasting, so not eating after dinner, fasting until breakfast the next morning, 12 to 14, 15 hours, is really pretty good for the brain. It helps it cleanse itself better, prevents the getting congested with plaques and other things. And again, there's a variety of supplements out there. And again, those are most of the important ones are noted in the book that I'll send you. Or certainly a lot of them. Well, probably most of them. There are new ones coming up all the time. There are lots of different formulations out there, and most are actually of some value in terms of supplements, nutritional supplements for the brain. Staying physically active, staying mentally active are just important things to do for our brain, as well as socially engaged. And of course, avoiding neurotoxins, molds, heavy metals, air pollution, all of those have been shown to obviously adversely impact the brain, as of course head injuries would. Practicing good oral hygiene. Gingivitis, periodontal disease creates inflammation, infections in the mouth that don't have far to go to get to the brain, and are now known to be significant contributors to vascular problems and to cognitive decline. Stress, we've talked about, is not good. So learning to manage that through whatever means, and like mindfulness, etc. Meditation has been shown to be helpful for people trying to revitalize their brain. And then replacing any harmful meds with healthier alternatives. We talked about that, addressing hearing issues and learning how to get a good night's sleep. So that's the most of the issues. And I mean, it can be really complicated. As I indicated, there are more than 100 different contributors to this. But when it comes down to it, what's amazing is just a few modifications in terms of diet and lifestyle. For some, it's going to be, if they're further down the line, it's going to be more than a few modifications. But some modifications that are certainly doable in diet and in lifestyle. A few supplements, maybe a few more than a few supplements for some people. Increased physical activity, mental activity, social interaction, learning new things, getting better sleep. Those simple things can have a dramatic synergistic impact on brain health and do much to reduce the risk of developing dementia. And so for my final slide, hopefully you can see that. If you like a copy of that book, send me an email. There's my email address. If you want to look and see what Dr. Bredesen does and learn from the top guy in the world, what he's finding. He's a brilliant guy. That's a great site, apollohealth.com. Good site you can send people that you know to, and they have a list of practitioners. They can help the people identify practitioners in their area, like us, like myself and my partners in this area. There are people like us all over the United States, at least, in many parts of the world now, that are practicing this that can be helpful for them. So, any questions then? Somebody says, thank you again. This gives us lots of hope. I hope so. That's one of my purposes. So thank you for saying that. It really is sad, as I think I mentioned in the first presentation, at the very time, and this is you'll find is one of my pet peeves, at the very time when seniors need to be doing something, being engaged in learning new things, exercising more, watching their diet, etc., they've been told or given this message that there's nothing that they can do except send money to the Alzheimer's Association and hope for a cure. Well, there's been very little that has come out of that approach. And the reality is there are lots of other things that they can be doing that can significantly reduce their risk for cognitive decline, and even if they're into cognitive decline, to arrest that if they take the appropriate action soon enough. So yeah, I'm glad if we're creating some hope out there. And that's one of my desires, that hopefully you can give your patients some hope and some guidance into the fact that there is something that they can do and where to go to get some help. Any other questions? I think either I put people to sleep, or
I think you must have done a wonderful job. That was a very great presentation. Thank you very much for doing that with us
yeah,
today.
thanks, Scott.
If anybody has any questions or anything that you'd like to follow up on, please feel free to email me. I can help you with that. I'm Scott@psychonline.com. And there's also obviously the information there on the slide if you'd like to reach out to Dave as well.
Yeah, and there's only, there's only 9 people. If somebody wants to give me a call, and if you, I can give you my phone number if you want to write it down, because there's only 9 of you, but it's 801-529-8238, 801-529-8238. I'm swamped with new clients now in January, you might imagine. I mean, we've had more than we've ever had before, to my eyeballs in evaluations, etc. But over this weekend, I'm going to have some time. Yeah, if you have a question, feel free to give me a call as well. Hopefully I can be helpful for you.
Also, if you or if you're aware of any colleagues who could use help getting your practice online, that PsychOnline can help with that. We have a platform for doing that. So I'd like to put in a plug for that just as a reminder. We thank you very much for joining us today. Dave, thank you very much for presenting today. We appreciate it, and we hope to hear more from you in the future.
Good. Thanks, you guys. Thanks, Scott. And